I'd been looking forward to this weekend for weeks. 2 quiet days at my parents' house, away from the constant noise of city life. I was curled up on the old floral couch in their living room, coffee warming my hands, when my phone buzzed. Seeing Mark's name pop up made me smile. He's my friendly next-door neighbor, always quick with a wave and a joke. But when I opened his message, the smile vanished. "Hey, just a heads up. The music at your place is really loud. Sounds like a full house over there." For a second, I just stared at the screen, my mind trying to catch up. Chris had told me he'd be spending the weekend at home, working on that urgent project that supposedly required total peace and quiet. I could still hear his voice in my head, promising to order takeout and keep it low-key. Low-key wasn't exactly how Mark was describing it. I typed back quickly, keeping my tone casual. "Are you sure it's coming from my house?" Mark's reply came almost instantly. "Pretty sure. I've seen several women coming and going for the past hour." My stomach dropped. I could feel my grip on the phone tighten, the coffee in my other hand suddenly losing its warmth. I didn't need to think. My body knew before my mind did. That sharp, twisting knot deep inside me. It was the kind that only shows up when something is seriously, irreversibly wrong. I set my coffee down on the side table, my hands suddenly restless. My parents were in the kitchen chatting, completely unaware of the little earthquake that had just gone off in my phone. I didn't want them to see my face right now. It would raise too many questions. Instead, I stood by the window, staring out at the familiar street I grew up on, trying to make sense of what Mark had said. Several women, coming and going, from my house. The thought alone made my skin prickle. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Chris had invited a few colleagues over to help with his project. But even as I tried to build that story in my head, I knew it didn't fit. Chris didn't work with women. He didn't even like hosting people at our place. And if it were something innocent, why hadn't he mentioned it to me? That silence spoke louder than the music Mark claimed was blasting through our walls. I typed a short thanks for letting me know to Mark, my fingers stiff on the keyboard. The knot in my stomach was growing tighter, and my mind was racing ahead of me. I could almost hear the bass thumping, the laughter spilling out of our windows. I didn't know what I'd find when I went back, but one thing was already certain. I wasn't going to just sit here and pretend I hadn't read that message. I slipped my phone into my pocket, but it felt heavier than usual, like it was carrying a secret I wasn't ready to face. My parents' laughter drifted in from the kitchen, warm and familiar. And for a split second, I wished I could just stay in that moment, safe, untouched by whatever was happening back home. But the image of women walking in and out of my house, of Chris in the middle of it, wouldn't leave me. It was like a movie reel running in my head, and I hated every frame. The more I thought about it, the more my pulse picked up. Questions started stacking one on top of the other. Who were they? How long had this been going on? And most of all, why now, when he thought I was miles away? My instincts whispered answers I didn't want to believe, but the truth was starting to take shape whether I liked it or not. I decided not to send another message to Mark, not to call Chris, not to do anything that might tip him off. No, if there was something to uncover, I wanted to see it with my own eyes. And somewhere, deep in that growing tension in my chest, I already knew. This weekend wasn't going to end the way I'd planned. I didn't pack my things right away. I waited until after dinner at my parents' place, forcing myself to smile, to join in their small talk, to hide the storm building under my skin. When the dishes were cleared and the goodnights exchanged, I slipped out quietly, telling them I needed to grab something from town. My car was parked in the driveway, but the moment I slid into the driver's seat, I felt my whole body shift. My weekend of rest had just turned into a mission. The drive back felt longer than usual, even though I knew I was probably pressing harder on the gas than I should. My mind kept replaying Mark's words, layering them with every suspicion I'd ever brushed aside. I didn't even bother turning on the radio. The silence in the car was thick, except for the occasional sound of my own breath, sharp and uneven. By the time I reached my neighborhood, it was late enough that most houses were dark. I parked a few houses down from mine, leaving the engine off and the keys in my lap. I sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the faint glow of my living room window in the distance. Whatever was happening inside, I was about to find out. I stepped out of the car and shut the door as quietly as I could, the night air cool against my skin. My heels clicked softly on the pavement, but I slowed my pace the closer I got, careful not to draw any attention. From half a block away, I could already hear it, the faint thump of bass, the rise and fall of voices, and a burst of laughter that made my jaw clench. This wasn't background noise. It was a full-blown party. I moved to the side of the house, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The blinds on the front window were slightly open, just enough to give me a slice of the inside. And there he was. Chris. Sitting on the couch like he didn't have a care in the world, one arm draped casually around a woman I'd never seen before. Her laugh was high and bright, the kind of laugh meant for being noticed. I froze, my breath catching, my hands balling into fists at my sides. He wasn't even trying to hide it. No nervous glances toward the door, no fake distance between them. Just comfortable. Like this was normal. Like I didn't exist. I felt something inside me shift in that moment. Not just hurt, but something sharper, steadier. I pulled my phone from my pocket, the decision already made before I'd even unlocked it. My fingers moved quickly, almost on autopilot, switching to the camera. Through that narrow gap in the blinds, I started recording. First, a slow pan of the room. The drinks scattered across the coffee table, the crowd of women talking and laughing, the way Chris leaned in closer to her as if the rest of the world didn't matter. Then I zoomed in on them, making sure every smirk, every careless touch was captured. I took a few photos too, each click of the shutter feeling like a quiet strike in my favor. Evidence, proof. The kind of truth that couldn't be twisted or denied. I didn't need to barge in, to scream, to demand answers. The images on my phone were already doing the talking for me. When I'd seen enough, I backed away from the window, keeping my steps light. The music faded with every stride until the night swallowed it. By the time I reached my car, I felt strangely calm. Not because it didn't hurt, it did, in ways I couldn't even name yet, but because I knew the power had shifted. And he didn't even know it. I didn't drive straight home to my parents' place. Instead, I just sat there in the car for a while, engine off, letting the quiet wrap around me. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and for the first time all night, I took a slow, deliberate breath. The anger was still there, burning hot, but underneath it was something colder. Calculation. I knew if I walked in there now, it would be chaos. Shouting, tears, maybe even regret. No, I wasn't going to give him that scene. I wanted him blindsided, the same way he'd blindsided me. The road ahead shimmered under the streetlights as I finally pulled away. Each mile put more distance between me and that living room, but my mind was already working through the details. If Chris thought this was just going to be a fight he could talk his way out of, he was in for a surprise. I wanted precision, timing. I wanted every piece of this to leave a mark. By the time I reached the familiar curve that led to my parents' street, I'd already started my list. A locksmith. A few friends I could trust to keep their mouths shut until it was time. And one call in particular, the one that could make this sting long after I was gone. I wasn't just thinking about leaving him. I was thinking about making sure he remembered the day I did. When I got back to my parents' driveway, the house was dark, their bedroom light already off. I slipped inside quietly, grateful that I didn't have to answer any questions. In the quiet of my old bedroom, I sat cross-legged on the bed with my phone in hand. the glow of the screen lighting my face. The locksmith was my first call. I explained exactly what I needed and when. Monday, midday, when I knew Chris would be at work. The man didn't ask questions, just gave me a time. Perfect. Next, I sent the videos and photos to a couple of friends I could trust. Not the gossipy kind, but the ones who would know exactly when and how to let this story breathe in the right places. I didn't need to blast it out to the world just yet. A slow leak would do the trick. Rumors have a way of finding the right ears, and I knew they'd eventually find their way back to him. And then, the last call. The one that made me smile in the dark. My brother's friend, who also happened to be Chris's boss. I forwarded everything without a single word. No explanation, no context. The images spoke for themselves, and I knew he'd connect the dots quickly. After all, Chris had told everyone at work he'd be pulling overtime that weekend. When I finally put my phone down, the room was quiet, except for the faint hum of the old ceiling fan above me. I leaned back against the pillows, staring at the shadows on the wall, feeling the strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. There was hurt, yes, but it wasn't consuming me the way I thought it would. What stood out more was the control, the feeling that for once, I held all the cards. He had no idea the clock was already ticking. I imagined his Monday, walking into work, smiling like nothing had happened, completely unaware that his boss had seen the footage before his first cup of coffee. Coming home that evening to a door that wouldn't open, fumbling with his keys, confusion turning to panic. And me, waiting. Calm, ready. Sleep didn't come easily that night. My mind kept turning over the plan, refining each detail, making sure I left nothing to chance. This wasn't just about catching him in the act. It was about making sure the fallout followed him into every corner of his life. And when it happened, he'd remember exactly who had lit the match. Monday evening came faster than I expected. I was sitting on the porch, coffee in hand, when I saw his car turn onto the street. I didn't move. Just watched as he pulled into the driveway, still in his work clothes, looking relaxed, like any other day. He walked up to the front door, slid his key in, and stopped. The key wouldn't turn. He tried again, jiggling it harder this time. I could see the confusion knitting his brow, his movements getting sharper. I stayed seated, legs crossed, letting him work it out in his head. The moment he looked over at me, I lifted the envelope from the small table beside me and held it out. "You might want this," I said, my voice steady. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning my face for some clue, but I didn't give him one. Inside was a set of divorce papers and a small USB drive. As he opened the envelope, I took a slow sip of coffee. "This house is for people who respect it, and the people in it. You don't qualify." The words left my mouth calm and deliberate, but I could see them hit him like a slap. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, my phone buzzed on the table beside me. I glanced at the screen and couldn't help the small, satisfied curve of my lips. It was a screenshot from a friend, a reply from Chris's boss to the video I'd sent. Just 5 words. "Thanks for letting me know. This won't be tolerated here." I tilted the phone so Chris could see it. His eyes flickered, scanning the message, and I caught the moment his stomach must have dropped. That easy confidence he'd walked up with was gone, replaced by something tighter, smaller. "You lied to me. You lied to them," I said, keeping my tone even, almost conversational. "Guess now everyone's on the same page." He started to reach for me, maybe to plead, maybe to explain, but I stood up before he could. The space between us felt like a wall, and I had no intention of letting him climb it. He looked toward the door again, like maybe this was all some misunderstanding that could be fixed if he just got inside. But I had already made sure that wouldn't happen. That lock was more than metal. It was a line he couldn't cross anymore. He stood there, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, like a man trying to figure out where to go next. I didn't fill the silence for him. Let him stew in it. The street was quiet except for the faint hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the block, and the tension between us felt almost loud enough to drown it out. I took one last sip of coffee, set the mug down, and stepped past him toward my car. "I think you've got everything you need right there," I said, nodding to the envelope still in his hands. He looked down at it like it might bite him, but I didn't wait for him to speak. I unlocked my car, sliding into the driver's seat without another glance back. As I pulled away, I caught a glimpse of him in the rearview mirror, still standing on the porch, still holding the evidence of everything he'd thrown away. I didn't feel sorry for him, not even for a second, because this wasn't just about locking him out of a house. It was about locking him out of my life. And I was already thinking about what came next. A few weeks later, my house didn't feel like his shadow was lingering anymore. The locks were mine, the silence was mine, and for the first time in years, the space actually felt like it belonged to me. That's when I decided it was time for my own party, the kind worth remembering. I made a guest list filled with people who had stood by me, neighbors who had sent quiet thumbs-up texts when they heard what happened, and friends who didn't flinch when the truth came out. On the night of the party, the place was alive. Music spilled from the speakers, laughter bounced off the walls, and the air smelled like good food and freedom. I caught myself smiling so much my cheeks hurt, moving from group to group, making sure everyone had a drink in hand and a story to share. There was no tension, no hidden agenda, just pure, unfiltered joy. Every now and then, I'd glance toward the front door, half expecting the ghost of that awful night to creep in. But it never did. The only people who crossed that threshold were the ones I trusted, the ones who understood what it meant to be invited in. And that, more than anything, made the night feel like a victory. The living room buzzed with energy, glasses clinking and conversations overlapping in the best possible way. I leaned against the kitchen counter for a moment, just to take it all in, the kind of scene that used to feel impossible when Chris was around. Back then, hosting meant walking on eggshells, worrying if he'd get moody or start nitpicking. Now, the air felt light, unburdened. Even the music sounded different, like it had more room to breathe. People kept telling me how good I looked, and maybe I did, but it wasn't the dress or the lipstick. It was the way my shoulders weren't carrying the weight they used to. I laughed more easily, listened more fully, and felt like I was actually present instead of watching my own life from a distance. At one point, Mark, yes, the same neighbor who'd sent the text that started it all, raised his glass in my direction. "Two better nights," he called out. Everyone joined in, their voices loud and warm. I lifted my glass back to him, the kind of silent thank you that only he would truly understand. Later that night, I found myself out on the porch, the cool air wrapping around me while the music and laughter carried on inside. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and snapped a photo of the crowd through the doorway, friends smiling, dancing, completely in the moment. I added a caption before posting it to my social media. "Some parties are worth remembering. Others are just proof you needed to leave." The notifications started rolling in almost instantly, little pings of support and curiosity. I didn't care who saw it or who connected the dots. If Chris stumbled across it, all the better. Let him see what a real celebration looks like. One that doesn't need lies or locked doors or whispered excuses. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and raised my glass to no one in particular, just to the night itself. The music swelled behind me, a warm reminder that I'd built this moment from the ashes of something ugly. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like the story was mine again.